question we are asked is, what trait separates lampreys from tuna on this cladogram? So we see that our traits are over here on this right-hand side, right? These are our derived characteristics. Derived characters, or our traits. Now, each of these lines leads to an organism, right? If the line passes through one of those traits, that means the organism has the trait. So like, for example, looking at this leopard, this line passes all the way through all of these traits, meaning it has all of those traits. But now, if a line does not pass through one of those traits, the organism does not have it. So for example, does this salamander have amniotic eggs? No, right? Because it doesn't pass through that trait. Okay? So let's keep that in mind as we go through our questions. Number 1, what trait separates lampreys from tuna on this cladogram? So the first thing we did was we found our lampreys and we found our tuna. What trait separates lampreys from tuna? Let me hear from Dion. What are you thinking?
I said their jaw size. I mean the jaw.
Yeah, and why'd you say that?
Because in the lamprey, it doesn't cross the jaw section, but the tuna does.
Perfect, you're exactly right. So the tunas have jaws, but the lampreys do not. Awesome. Number 2, what separates a salamander from a turtle? So same thing, we're gonna go up, find our salamanders, and find our turtles. What trait separates the salamander from the turtle? Let me hear from Evelyn. What are you thinking? All right, I'm gonna come back to Evelyn. Let me bounce over to Becky. What'd you get for number 2?
An amniotic egg.
Perfect, and why'd you choose that?
Because it's in between the salamander and the turtle.
Exactly, right? So that means that the turtles have amniotic eggs, but the salamanders do not. No, Samuel said in the chat, I just Googled what a lamprey is, and those pictures are horrifying. Those creatures are going to haunt my dreams. Lampreys are pretty, pretty gross. Look up a picture in your free time. Maybe I can look it up at the end of class today.
I have a question.
Yes, what's up? Amniotic egg? Does anyone know the answer?
Is it like given birth instead of like an egg?
Okay, well, we've heard the word amniotic fluid before, right? Hold on, I can't hear you. Stop moving your chair. What? Okay. Okay, Aaron says the egg doesn't have a shell and it's more of like, and then we kind of trailed off. Okay, so we're on the right track. Why don't I have someone Google amniotic egg? Tell me, what do we find out? What do you think an amniotic egg is? Think about, we've heard this phrase amniotic fluid in humans, right? So what's an amniotic egg? As soon as you've Googled it, put it, yeah, Mosahid says it has water in it, right? So we find those eggs in fluid, right? Just how inside us, right, our babies develop in amniotic fluid. That means that those eggs develop in water, right? They are in a watery environment.
So the fetus develops, the baby develops in a watery environment.
Yep.
Okay. Oh, guess that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was wondering, don't turtles lay eggs?
They do lay eggs, right? But
They don't. I thought amniotic egg meant getting like impregnation.
oh, okay. Yeah, it just means that that organism develops in fluid. Yeah, great job.
That makes sense.
Perfect. Look at that teamwork, us working together to figure it out. All right, number 3, which organism is most closely related to the leopard? What are we thinking for this one? Which organism is closely related to the leopard? Mosahid says turtle. Why do you say that, Mosahid?
In the reading, it says like whatever's the closest to something else is like what's like more closely related.
Exactly, right? So we see that because these are closest on the diagram, that means they are closely related. All right, closest on cladogram equals closely related. Great job. All right, number 4, which organism's DNA will differ the most from the leopard? So we just said that the turtle is most closely related to the leopard, but which organism is the most different from the leopard? Aaron, what are you thinking?
I said that it was
Mhm.
because it's the outgroup, like it has none of those traits in common. And it's just like these close to the left.
Perfect. So Erin described the lancelet as the outgroup, right? And she said that that meant that they have no traits in common, right? It's kind of separated from the rest of these organisms because it doesn't have any of these derived characters or traits. So it doesn't have any traits in common with the leopard, right? It's the farthest apart on that cladogram. All right, what questions do we have about numbers 1 through 4? Yes, Becky, you can unsubmit and then edit it. All right, let's go ahead and move on to our next cladogram then. So we're looking at a similar cladogram here. We're just looking at different organisms, but we're still looking at the same outline here, right? We still have our derived characters or our traits on the right-hand side. Animals are on the top, right? If a line passes through those traits, it means the animal has it. If it doesn't, it means it doesn't have that trait. So number 1, what separates rabbits and primates from the crocodiles on this cladogram? Ian, what are you thinking for that?
Hair and head. Wait, no. I said any had eggs, but it was hair and eggs with shells.
Yeah. So there are 2 things you could have said here. You could have said hair as well as eggs with shells. Because we see that those are 2 traits that separate them. They don't have those in common. Great job.
I have a question.
Yep, what's up?
What is like bony skeleton? That's like saying reddish red.
Bony skeleton's talking like they've got bones, like we do.
So like bones instead of any bone.
Sure, or just kind of bones in general, right? Because sharks actually don't have bones, they've got cartilage, right? But everything else on this diagram does have bones. All right, number 2. Which organism is most closely related to the rodents and rabbits on this cladogram? So what organism do we find closest to the rodents and the rabbits? Let me hear from Adrian. What'd you get for this one? All right, I'm going to come back to Adrian. Let me bounce over to Eunice. What'd you get for number 2?
I got crocodiles.
Okay, and why'd you say that?
Because all of them have amniotic eggs.
Okay. But we're talking about rodents and rabbits, right? And we just said that there are actually some traits that separate the primates from the crocodiles, or the rabbits from the crocodiles. Is there an organism that's maybe a little bit more closely related to those rodents and rabbits?
Primates.
Yeah, and why do you say that?
Because they both have hair, so that makes them most related.
Exactly, right? We see that they are close together on that cladogram, and they also share some of those traits in common, right? They both have hair. You're exactly right. Right, so primates, because they're closest on the cladogram, and share many traits. All right, which brings us to number 3. What 5 traits do the bird and its closest relative share? So let's look at our bird. Let me erase this to give us some room. What 5 traits does that bird? Ian, give me one trait they have in common.
Eggs with a shell.
Perfect. Eggs with shells is one. Kaden, give me another one.
Hair. Oh wait,
Do birds have hair?
yeah. Like feathers, right?
I don't think feathers are the same thing as hair, though. So look at that line that leads to the birds. What does that line pass through?
Bony skeleton.
Perfect. Bony skeleton is another one. Ah, hold on. All right. Jalissa, give me another one.
Another one would be vertebrae.
Perfect. All right. Mohamedou, give me another one.
Really nice.
Perfect. Now you might be thinking to yourself, but wait a minute. Birds only have 2 legs, but what else do they have? 2 wings, right? So altogether that counts for 4 limbs. And finally, what is our last trait that these animals have in common? Let's see. Lauren, what'd you get?
For the 5th one, I got the amniotic egg.
Perfect. All right, so these were the 5 traits or derived characters that that organism shares with its closest relative. Awesome. Now, number 4, which organism will have DNA most similar to the bird and why? What do we think? Let me hear from Samuel. What'd you get for this one? Number 4.
I said that the organism that's most similar to the bird is the crocodile because they're right next to each other on the cladogram, and then also they have the same traits like the eggs with shells, amniotic eggs, forelimbs, bony skeleton, and vertebrae, which makes them the most similar, like in their DNA.
Perfect. You are exactly right. So I love that you gave me both of those reasons, right? You said they're closest on the cladogram, which tells us they're most closely related, but then they also have those same 5 traits or characteristics that we actually just wrote down. Great job. All right, which leads us to number 5. We just said that the crocodile is going to be the most similarly related, but which organism's DNA is going to be the most different from the bird? Let me hear from Jocelyn. What do you think?
I chose sharks because in the cladogram you can see the sharks is the last one, and also they don't have that much of similar traits.
Yeah, they actually only have one of these traits in common. What is the one trait that they share? Out of these 5, what's the only one that they have in common? What do we think? Go ahead and put it in the chat if you know. What is the one trait that these sharks and birds have in common? They both have what? Vertebrae, right? So the sharks and the birds, as Jocelyn said, are farthest apart on this cladogram, which means they're not closely related at all. The only commonality they have is that they both have vertebrae. All right. All right, what questions do we have about numbers 1 through 5 here? Number 5 was the shark, because we see it's farthest apart from the bird on the cladogram, which means they're most distantly related. All right. Moving on, let's use some molecular and genetic evidence. So biologically, one could use anatomical features, behavior, or molecular similarities and differences in constructing a cladogram. When we're talking about molecular evidence, we're looking at the number of mutations in a common strand of DNA, or comparing strings of amino acids and noting differences in the order. So cytochrome C is a protein located in the mitochondria of cells involved with cellular respiration. And below, we're looking at a table that shows us the amino acid sequences for cytochrome C in several organisms. And we're going to use this data to answer some questions. Right, so number one, the more amino acids that an organism has in common, both type and order, indicates the closer the relationship. And the same is true for nucleotides. So let's compare this biochemical data above and figure out which organism is most closely related to the lizard and why. Let me get a volunteer for this one. What are we thinking? Ian, go for it.
Because they have the most amino acids.
Oh. Right, so Ian says the shark because they have the most amino acids in common. So this one actually required you to look at the amino acid sequence of each of these organisms and figure out which one was the closest. And if we do what? Well, let's look and see. So let's compare these amino acids. So far, they're looking pretty identical. All right. And it looks like you're correct because we see that they actually have the same amino acid sequence. And if they have the same amino acid sequence, what does that mean? They're going to code for the same what? Protein. Perfect. So the answer here was the shark. They have the same amino acid sequence, which means they're going to code for the same protein. All right, number two. Which organism is most closely related to the dolphin and why? Let me get a volunteer for this one. All right, and why do you say that?
They have the same amino acid.
Oh. All right, let's look at our dolphin sequence. And then let's look at our cat sequence.
Oh, never mind.
Oh, Mohamedou says never mind. What made you change your mind?
It's only like that the first half.
Right? The first half looks pretty good, but then what do we notice? We see, oh wait, there's a difference here. Right, is there another answer that we got?
Yeah, I think there was some other.
I see someone's raising their hand. Caitlin, go for it.
I got kangaroo
Why did you choose that?
because the amino acids match up the best.
Oh, okay, so let's check it out. So we've got Lu, iso, pro, phi, il, Lu, ser, his, val. Oh, wait. I see they also have two differences though. So guys, if we see that there are two differences in each of these amino acid sequences, what should we have done next? We should then look at what? Oh, Mosahid says then we should look at the DNA. Now, Caitlin, I'm going to come back to you. Which organism had the more closely related DNA sequence to the dolphin? Was it the kangaroo or the cat?
It's the kangaroo. That's what I meant to say the first time.
Okay, so let's take a look at these DNA sequences. All right, I'm going to highlight these in, let's do red.
It's the same.
Oh, Mohamedou says, oh, it's the same, right? Because if we look at the DNA sequence of the dolphin and compare it to the kangaroo, right, we see that CTA, ATC, CCC, CG, TTT, ATC, CTA, CTT, TCC, CAT. Oh, I see one difference here, but then the rest of it's actually the same, right? Okay, so let's check that out too. Or is that a CTA or a GTA? Hold on. Oh, CTA. So there are two differences here. But then let's also compare it to the cat. Well, we got one difference here. One difference here and one difference here. Right, so back to what Caitlin was saying, you're right. The kangaroo is most closely related because there's only two differences in those DNA sequences compared to the cats, which have 3. So the kangaroo is most closely related to the dolphin in this case. All right. Now number 3. What's up, Ian?
So why should we look at the DNA? Because even though there might be a difference in the DNA, we don't know if it's important because what makes traits and different, what differs traits is protein.
You're right.
And we know that some DNA sequences code for the same protein or the same amino acid. So even though one of them has AAC and the other one has ACC, if it codes for the same amino acid protein,
So you're right,
it
right?
can very well be the same species.
You're right. But remember that we just looked and we saw that the kangaroo and the cat both had the same difference in that amino acid sequence, right? But we're still trying to figure out which one's most closely related to the dolphin. So since the amino acid sequences were the same, we then had to look at the DNA to figure out which one is most closely related to this dolphin. Because this is just for one protein. This isn't talking about in the entire organism. This is just for the instructions to build that one protein. Does that make sense? Okay. All right, let's move on to number 3. How do you think different amino acid sequences would affect organisms, and explain your answer? Let me hear from Adrian. What'd you get for this one?
Actually, I didn't do this one yet because I was confused. So I didn't get to it.
Amino acids code for what?
Like the different traits
Right.
in an organism.
What's that in between step there? So eventually we're going to get traits, but amino acids, when they string together, create what? They're the building blocks of what molecule? Starts with a P.
Proteins.
Proteins, right? And then proteins are what code for those traits, as you told me. So how would different amino acid sequences affect organisms? Well, if amino acids code for proteins and proteins code for traits, a different amino acid sequence is going to mean what? Ian, go for it.
Different protein.
A different protein, and ultimately a different what? A different trait. All right, so that's all you needed to say. Different amino acids are going to code for different traits. Great job. All right, now I'm going to speed us along to this last question because this is, I know a lot of us had trouble with this. So for this one, I asked you guys to create your own cladogram. I gave you a series of organisms, and I wanted you to figure out where do we place them on this diagram. Now, this section right here was super, super important, right? This is where you get your information. These were your derived characters that were included on your graph. Patients, I'll go up at the end of class, okay? I'm gonna get us through this. So the first thing we had to do was divide the animals into 2 groups depending on if they possess vertebrae or backbones. So let's take a look at our list of organisms and divide them into groups of vertebrates. Oh, I spelled that wrong. And invertebrates. All right, someone tell me, what were my vertebrates in this example? Which organisms had vertebrae? Shout them out, put them in the chat. Right, like we know that a chimpanzee has a vertebrae, right? What else? Ian? An elephant, perfect. What other vertebrates do we have? What other animals have a backbone? Yep, Apostolo says the toad. Dion says the gorilla. What else? I think there's one more. It might fly. The eagle, right? So these are our animals that have vertebrae, have a backbone. But what were my animals that did not have a vertebrae? Go for it. Perfect. The octopus, the spider, and the butterfly. Right, but we're not done yet, because then the instructions tell us to divide our vertebrates into whether or not they give live birth or have eggs. All right, so let's divide these into live birth or eggs. Out of these organisms, which ones give live birth? The chimp, for one. What else? Yep, Dion says the elephant. What else? And the gorilla. Great job, Eunice. And what are my organisms that lay eggs? Go for it. The toad and the eagle. Great job. But still, we're not done. We've got a few more traits to look at. So then we're told to divide those who give live birth into whether or not they have opposable thumbs, like the ones that you have. All right, so thumbs or no thumbs. Which organism here does not have opposable thumbs? The elephant. Great job. But both the chimp and the gorilla do. All right, but we're not done yet. We still got two more traits to look at, two more characters. So then we're told to go back to our invertebrates and divide them into whether or not they have an exoskeleton or a rigid exterior covering their body. All right, so exoskeleton or no exoskeleton. Which of these organisms have an exoskeleton, have that crunchy exterior around their body? Crunchy. Like when you step on that cockroach, you might feel it crunch. Ew. Which of these organisms have an exoskeleton? Yep, the spider. And what else? And the butterfly. Perfect. All right, guys, now I know the bell is about to ring, but I do want you guys to stick around and get these last few examples. It'll just be about a minute. All right, and then our organism that does not have an exoskeleton is our octopus. The last thing we were told to do is split those with the exoskeleton into whether or not they have wings or no wings. Which of these organisms has wings, butterfly or spider? Thankfully not the spider, right? So the butterfly has wings, the spiders do not. So then we were told to use these characteristics and then insert the animals into our cladogram based on what traits they have in common. So amongst these animals, which one would we consider our out group? Which animal had the least in common with the rest of these species? The octopus, right? So we're actually going to put our octopus all the way over here in the corner. Now, what were our two animals that had an exoskeleton? Yep, the spider and the butterfly. We're going to put the butterfly here because it was the one that had wings. All right, what were our vertebrates that laid eggs? Perfect, the toad and the eagle. All right, what was our vertebrate that gave live birth? Elephant. And then what were our two vertebrates that had opposable thumbs? Perfect, the chimp and the gorilla. All right, guys, so that is what your cladogram should look like. We're not going to have a chance to go over these questions, so make sure you do those on your own. Now, your homework tonight is going to be to watch your Evolution Day 6 video. And of course, those notes and exit ticket are due tomorrow morning at 8:30. What questions do we have about this, guys? Amazing. Well, go ahead and resubmit this cladogram worksheet. I will get those graded this week and insert them into Google Classroom
Miss,
or in PeoplePath. Yes, what's up?
pull up a little bit, like just a little bit, so I could see where you wrote the thing. Thank you.
Of course. Bye, guys. Have a wonderful day. And yes, Patience, I'm going to go up to the top for you. Which question did you miss, Patience?
this page. Thank you.
Sure, perfect.
Bye.
Bye, have a good day.
It's fine.
Yes, what's up?
What is the question?